Thank you very much. It's really a privilege to address such a distinguished audience here and globally. And the organizer have asked me to speak about, for my speech to address the question is how the current shortage, global energy crisis is bringing back the Middle East to the fore to the center of the global energy map. So this is very much my presentation is going to be about. The next slide is very much like, we can see this graph. This graph epitomizes really what we're seeing now at the global level. I know it's European prices, but this is very much like impacting the rest of the world. We're seeing just like gas prices in Europe going through. And the reason, of course, is, we all know it, it's like a shortage of supply from Russia. The picture is about Nord Stream 2. It's not this pipeline. I've just chosen this picture because it's nice. It's the other pipelines that are affected by the shortage. It's Nord Stream 1 and other pipelines going through Europe. So we are all familiar probably with how it works. UCFOs, it's just like higher energy prices, higher production prices, higher consumer prices, inflation, higher interest rates, and slowdown in growth slowdown, and possibly recession. Can I have the next? Thank you. And you can see CNN business headlines here. You're expecting people, economists expecting a US recession and also alarm about a possible recession in Europe. Two big, huge markets. And, we probably, and this is what has brought back the Middle East to the center of the global energy map. It's really that. And you can see leaders from the US President Macron, the German officials meeting with UAE and Saudi and Qatari leaders to get more supply. So this is very much like what's happening or what has happened. And it's very interesting in the sense that this time is a little bit different than last time. So this time we didn't see really an increase. Everybody would have thought, can I have the next slide? Thank you. Everybody would have thought that this is an opportunity for the Middle East, for Gulf countries, to just like cramp up supply and grab more market share at a good price. This is not happening. It's not happening for two reasons. Why? It's the crisis is about natural gas. It's not really about oil. And natural gas dynamics are very different from oil. Natural gas is about long-term supply. It requires infrastructure, different infrastructure. It's not as possible to replace natural gas with oil. The second thing is due to how the Gulf now is planning its own finances, it's planning its own economies. It's different. I think the lessons of the past were learned. The lessons of the boom-bust cycles of the past have been learned. We've seen boom-bust cycles in 80s and the 90s after the Asian financial crisis. A big one related to the subprime crisis when oil prices went all the way to 100, almost 150, and then they crashed under $30 a barrel. All of this has been learned, and this is very much like what it looks like, a boom-bust cycle adapted to current times, to nowadays. So we have an energy supply crisis, high energy prices, and everybody comes and say, want more oil. And then we have the other events, all the way, which, leading to slower economic growth, and then we are going to have a drop in demand and a possible recession, which is going to make it even worse. So this is why now we are seeing the Middle Eastern countries managing supply in a different way, closely manage supply. Next. And we've seen OPEC, for instance, just like reversing. It's increased a little bit its output, and then now it's decreasing it again, because they are very keen on avoiding these boom-bust cycles. So it's very much like a different Middle East now. I think really we are looking at a different Middle East. We are looking at a different mindset in the Middle East this time. And this crisis very much reflects it. Next slide. This explains a little bit what we in the Middle East know. I mean, like pretty much know the correlation between oil and the local economies. But maybe it can be insightful for our global audience. I mean, like we can see the correlation is still strong. It's still strong, for instance, Saudi Arabia. It's less strong in the UAE because the UAE has gone some way towards diversifying its economy away from oil. And this is an important reason why we are managing. I mean, like the region here is managing supply, oil supply, very cautiously. Next. I'm going to talk a little bit about the region because just like to bring the local flavor to this global conference, and it's an opportunity for me to highlight some important events as a journalist that we are going to be covering. And so Expo 2020 obviously is behind us. Next year is going to be Qatar, the soccer. I mean, soon it's going to be the World Cup in Qatar. And next year, at the end of next year, we're going to have the Global Climate Summit in the UAE. And these events are important because they show the Middle East, I think, in a different light. Those of us who were here, who lived the pandemic in the UAE, know that the pandemic was managed relatively well here and relatively better than in other places. The other thing is we are looking forward to major global events like these being held in our region. We don't have to worry about energy supply, meaning like this is where it's coming from. We're not like in Europe where actually we can see a hard winter or actually in a lack, a real shortage in supply. So we have many factors that make us here in the Middle East in a better place. I'm saying this because I know that all of you are CFOs and you're planning your budget for next year and bracing for inflation, how's big, how small, how it's going to reflect on my purchase and all of that. So I think these events, together with the past, what we've seen recently, and the kind of resilience of the Middle East, and I'm talking about the Gulf economies, of course, the Gulf economies make us, or make you CFOs perhaps in a good position relative to other places. Next. And this is very much like the data from the IMF. You can see the IMF contained, the inflation contained in the Middle East on the, I took 2023 as a reference here. You can see it contained in the Middle East and not contained elsewhere in many places elsewhere. The same way, and the reason it's contained, I think, in the Middle East, or at least in the Gulf, I think it's because, one, we have revenue in dollar, and two, the dollar is strong, and it's dampening imported inflation. The Middle East, the Gulf region does import lots of goods, but the strength of the dollar makes inflation relatively contained. The other thing I'd like to highlight in this graph are the growth forecasts for next year, which is quite strong also. Like you can see our region in a dark green, which puts it at 6% or more. It's of course the impact of higher energy prices. Next. Thank you, sir. It's very much like, it's a great graph by the Economist Intelligence Unit. It just like shows very much like the difference. If you look at Saudi Arabia here, for instance, just like in a very, very different situation compared to the rest of the world. So it's extremely, I think, it's very much like, I'm not saying that it's good to be now, it's a sweet spot to be in the Middle East now, to our CEOs, the CFOs, sorry, this is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I think as a CFO, you have less things to worry about, from inflation, from growth, from the perspective, both on the long term and the short term. So with that, I think the takeout should be for the global audience. I understand that many of us looking are from the Like we have like a big audience in the US and in Europe, for instance. I hope that you are finding this insightful. I know it's centered on the Middle East, it's the local flavor, but I think at the same time, maybe there's an understanding why the Middle East is just not like ramping up oil production and trying to understand the logic behind why Gulf countries are really managing oil supply, and they are careful about it. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Maher. So, obviously, for us living in the Middle East, it's amazing how much how much the world is talking about us from a whole bunch of reasons, not just around oil, but the emergence of the service economy. And one of the major things that we've been experiencing here is that we know that this region wants to be at the cutting edge of alternative energy. And I guess the question here is, what sort of impact is the war and the uncertainty and almost this movement back to the need for oil, the need for fossil fuels? How's it going to impact that particular vision? Is it going to change it for us and potentially the rest of the world?
I think for the Middle East, the Middle East is strongly committed. It's to the transition. I mean, Egypt this year is hosting COP27. The EU next year is hosting COP28. They have announced plans for net zero emission and the horizons for that. It's very much like they committed. At the same time, I think the Gulf feels vindicated in the sense that initially there was like a strong push to just like cut or remove fossil fuels altogether. Whereas the Middle East was very much like saying, wait, there's a transition. We cannot just stop investing in fossil fuels, cut completely investing in all kinds of fossil fuels, as we've seen happening, we've seen several wealth funds doing that. So I think what's going to happen now is that the Middle East is going to be very cautious about completely committed. I mean, I think there is no doubt about the commitment of the Gulf countries to use their wealth, their current wealth, to ensure a very good transition away from fossil fuels and to sustainability and all of that. But at the same time, what I think is going to happen is we're going to have a serious dialogue now, meaning it's not like just you telling us to not invest or to invest or to increase production or to decrease production, all of that. It's going to be more like an interactive thing. Do you want us to invest? You invest with us. You want us to increase? Then let's see where this market is going to, where are the markets for the increase? You want us to decrease? Let's see how we can manage it. So I think this is how it's going to be going forward. But the sustainability part, and I know a lot of us, a lot of you, have invested a lot of money in making sure that to comply, for your businesses to comply with sustainability targets and for the transition. I think this is a long-term objective, whether it's in the Middle East or globally. There is no change, I think.
Yeah, well, I guess we're finance people at heart in this audience. So, how do we even begin to sort of prepare for the next couple of years? These economics that you've been talking about are having a huge impact on our businesses and the costs of, and I've just spent some time in the UK where energy prices, it's about the only thing that everyone's talking about at the moment. So as finance leaders, what do we predict for next year? What sort of inflation rates are going to be expected? What should we be thinking about in planning for 2023?
Can I have the slide before last? Sorry, if it's still possible, because I have the answer to Russell's in it. The IMF projections. It's extremely different, you can look across the channel, you can look at France. It's very interesting. Your question is very interesting here. Just like before this one. Just like look at across the channel here. Inflation growth is here. You can see the UK.
Maher.
You can see the UK in orange. You can see France in green. France probably because it gets it gets about almost 75% of its electricity from nuclear, and it's giving it a hedge against inflation, so to speak. But this is very much what you should be expecting in terms of inflation. And I think from the Middle East perspective, it looks quite good.
Okay, so there we have it. Inflation rates to put into our business plans for the next 12 months on a global basis. So, got a little bit of time. Any questions? Okay. Any questions from the room? So, Maher, we must reconsider the view about the future of nuclear energy, the most clean and efficient energy the world can get. What are your views on where nuclear energy is going to fit within this global climate that you're talking about?
I don't think my view is very relevant here. But the facts are, and we just mentioned it in the case of France. For a country like France that relies, I think, between 75 to 80% on nuclear energy, now France is in a much better shape, say, than Germany. And Germany now is shifting to more coal, as we all know. So from that perspective, I think there is a case for nuclear, certainly, and the people who are just saying, phase it out, maybe, not for ideological reason, of course, I'm just from economic reason, I think maybe now they are having second thoughts.
Okay, and this one's a little bit more intricate a question. So I see IMF stats are very generic, including committed costs being considered where it could decrease, while actual consumer inflation goes up at a very high percentage. Isn't this to be considered conservative? So what will be realistic inflation increase as a result of this?
It's extremely difficult to answer this question because it's each country has its own conditions. Let's take the region here for the Middle East. The Middle East imports almost lots of things. Lots of consumer goods, and it should be impacted by inflation because it's importing these goods from it's importing goods from places where production costs are rising, and yet it's contained. Why? Because of the currency strengths, and because of other factors. Obviously, a lot of it is linked to some markets. It has to do also with trading partners, the regional trading partners. So it's extremely difficult to answer this specific question, just about inflation globally, how it's going to work. It is a relevant question in the sense that in this graph, which I just showed, the figures might not reflect the real numbers, and actual inflation might be much higher, and they can continue. They can just stay higher for longer time. This is true, but again, I don't think it's possible to just say in this country or globally how it's going to look like. It's about country case by case.
Okay, there's a few more questions, but we're out of time. It's a very tight timetable that we run to today. So thank you very much, Maher.
Thank you, sir.
It's been a pleasure having you here, and thanks for the questions.